Good morning, brothers and sisters, those who are here and who are tuning in. When I was about the age of Noah, somewhere between 12 and 14, I remember a preacher visiting us from another gathering that was some distance away. And it was a short man. We made fun of him as boys because he had no neck, or he had very short neck. And he preached very monotone, very much like one voice. And that was his whole sermon, was just one tone. And he preached on blessings. And ever since then, I remember him talking about blessings and us all of us boys falling asleep. But today I want to talk about blessings. And since then, I've learned to appreciate that blessing when someone blesses someone else in the scripture, it is extremely important. It is an extremely important piece that is worthy of paying attention, of looking deeper into. Because in blessings, you find two cases. Either it is something where a superior blesses an inferior and foretells the future, such as God blesses Abraham and says, "Believe me, I will lead you forth. I will make you a great nation." Abraham at the time was just a single man. Or it is a reflection of the past and also a foretelling of the future, both at the same time. And this is what happens in this story that we're going to look at today. We're going to spend all of our time in the book of Genesis, so please turn with me to chapter 49 of Genesis. Genesis chapter 49. What we find in this chapter is Jacob blessing his sons before he passes away. And he goes through each of his sons individually, and it's interesting that it is really interesting that Reuben gets a lot of focus, Judah gets a lot of focus, and Joseph gets a lot of focus. And I have always wondered, why did the Messiah have to come out of the tribe of Judah? Why Judah? Why not Reuben? Or God often worked with the secondborn, right? He didn't work with Esau, he worked with Jacob. So instead of Judah, why not Simeon? Instead of Reuben, why did this Messiah have to come out of Judah and not Simeon? And I think I may have found an answer in my study, and I would like to go through it with you. And in doing so, we will compare Reuben and Judah throughout the years, throughout their life, and how we'll look a little bit at their experiences and how it happens in their life and what seems to float to the surface about these two men. And we're going to discover that Judah understood that salvation requires sacrifice, and Reuben never did. And I believe that is the sole reason why Judah was given the prophecy that one day the peacegiver would come from his roots. So let's read in chapter 49, and we're going to read from verse 1 to verse 3, and then we're going to jump a few verses and focus on Judah's blessing. So chapter 49 of Genesis, reading in verse 1. And Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather together, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Unstable as water you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it, he went up to my couch." Starting in verse 8. Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from beneath his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. Binding his donkey to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he washes his garment in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. And if you were to continue reading, you'd come to Joseph's blessing in verse 22, and you'd see that Reuben gets two verses, I believe, of blessing. Judah gets 5, and Joseph also gets 5. And that is somewhat understandable because we know of the accomplishments of Judah, right? He saved all of Egypt. He saved pretty much the Middle East through his management of the people of Egypt throughout those 7 good years and then the 7 years of drought. But Judah, there's not really a whole lot known about him. And yet he is given this really good, this excellent blessing. Any son who gets a blessing like this from his father, I think, should count himself lucky. And so what I want to do with you today is try to understand why Judah is given this promise that the Messiah will come through his roots and through nobody else. And of course, where we get that from is from verse 10. Jacob prophesies or blesses Judah and says, "The scepter shall not depart." And the scepter is the symbol of a king, it is a symbol of authority. Judah is also compared to being someone as a lion. And there's no other animal in the animal kingdom that is known for authority and for dominance, for rulership and authority as the lion, right? He is called the king of the jungle for an apparent reason. And so we're going to back up to the time when Reuben and Judah are born, and flip through the chapters and see what we can reap from the scriptures. So we'll start in chapter 29 of Genesis, which is when both Judah and Reuben are recorded as being born. Reuben and Judah are both sons of the same woman. They're both sons of Leah. And if you remember, I'll build a lot on your knowledge about the story of Jacob and the story of Joseph in this whole sermon. If you remember, Jacob was given or had two wives, right? He loved Leah, but he loved Rachel, but Laban gave him Leah first because she was the first one. She was the older one. However, it appears that Jacob didn't love Leah as he loved Rachel. And so in Genesis chapter 29, verse 31, we read, "When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, which means see or behold, a son. For she said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me." In verse 35, it talks about Judah. So we have Reuben, then we have Simeon, then we have Levi, and then we come to Judah. In verse 35, "And she conceived again and bore a son and said, now I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she stopped bearing." And the name Judah is means praise. So Reuben and Judah are both the sons of the same lady, the same woman. They're both sons of Leah. And Leah was unloved by Jacob. And in her childbearing, Leah saw her husband loving her more and more and more. And I believe that may have contributed to Reuben's unstable character. We're going to jump to chapter 30 and verse 14, and we see that Reuben, very early on in his life, is already caught between two women trying to compete for the love of their husband. Chapter 30, verse 14. "Now Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said," she would be Leah, "but Leah said to her, is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" And Rachel said, "Therefore he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes." And the story continues. Reuben comes home from the field one day and has fruits in his hands, and just like any son wants to rejoice his mother's heart and brings them to his mother. And what ensues is not his mother saying thank you or showering Reuben with her love, but instead he comes into a situation where these two women, which are sisters, are competing. It's an unstable situation, and they're competing for Jacob's love. And so very, very early on, this dynamic is what Reuben and everybody else in Jacob's family lives in or lives under. And so this is their existence. We're now going to jump forward quite a number of years to Genesis chapter 37. And remember what we're after. I hope you will flip through quite a few passages. So I'll try to remind us what our focus is we're looking for a comparison between Judah and Reuben and what jumps out and how the scriptures actually, contrast these two men. So chapter 37, starting in verse 1. "Now Jacob dwelled in the land where his father was a stranger, and in the land of Canaan." This is the history of Jacob. Joseph being 17 years old, so we have come a long ways, because Joseph is which child is he again? Joseph is the 12th child of Jacob, so he's the second last. And being the second last meant that Reuben and Judah and Levi and so on, they would have all grown up quite a bit by this time. So starting in verse 2, this is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Silpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. Also, he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. Jumping to verse 11. And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in his dreams. We're not going to focus on the dreams, but one thing that I want to highlight here is just Joseph's existence, or his situation as he grows up. We're going to start at verse 12 again. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." So he said to him, "Here I am." Then he said to him, "Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me." So he sent him out to the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. Verse 18. Now when they being the brothers, the 10 brothers or 11 brothers, now when they see him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, 'Some wild beast has devoured him.' We shall see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not kill him." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit, which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might." And Reuben's motive was he wanted to deliver him out of their hands and bring Joseph back to his father. So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph off of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal, and then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brother, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brothers listened. Then the Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. What we see in this chapter is that dramatic event in Joseph's life. He was just going to check up on his brothers, and at the end of the chapter, he ends up as a slave. So great was the hate of his brothers that they were bent. They were ready to lay hands on him and shed their own brother's blood. They were ready to kill him. But what we see here is that two brothers speak. The rest are not recorded to ever have spoken, or maybe they just went along with the flow. One of the men was Reuben, and the other was Joseph. And here we already see that Reuben seems to have a peaceable attitude, or perhaps he is an individual who is seeking to make others happy. Notice that he notices that killing our brother, that is a wrong thing, and he was not on board with that. But at the same time, he didn't confront his brothers and said, "This is not right." And where I get this from is in verse 21. He said, let us not kill him. He uses the language of us. He's part of the group. Let us not kill him. Let's just hold off a little bit on the hot steam and so on. Let us not kill him. Let's not shed blood. And his motivation, we see also at the end of verse 21, is that he is really just looking to bring Joseph back to his father. It doesn't seem that it's not readily apparent that Reuben thought this was right or wrong, or that he loved Joseph, and as a result, he said no to his brother's plan to kill Joseph. But his motivation is that he just wants to bring Joseph back to his father, and that is that. Judah, on the other hand, looks at Joseph and looks at the situation, and the question that seems to pop up into his mind is, where can I get some personal gain out of this? What is in it for me? If we kill him, we don't stand to gain anything other than that we got rid of him. That is the only benefit really that we get if we kill him. However, if we sell him, not only are we rid of him, but we also have some money on our hands. And so he convinces the brothers and said, look, what is the use? What is the use if we actually spill his blood? He is our brother, and that already doesn't feel quite right. However, if we sell him to the Ishmaelites, they're going to take him away to Egypt. Joseph is 17. He's likely never going to come back. We are rid of him, and we also have some money on our hands. And so with that logic, seems persuasive, seems logical, makes sense, he convinces his brothers, and his brothers jump along. Nobody else seems to say anything. Reuben doesn't understand that in order to save Joseph, he would have to become a substitute. He would have to sacrifice himself. And Judah is far from recognizing that too. He sees his perspective, or his perspective on the situation is what is in it for him. And no one seems to be interested in saving Joseph. We're going to see that later on when we're going to jump the whole story of Joseph going to Egypt and Potiphar's wife and prison and the dreams that Joseph finally interprets and his ascent to the throne, so to speak. We find that later on, Reuben never gets that lesson, that to save someone else, you must sacrifice yourself. Salvation requires sacrifice. To rescue someone, you must substitute yourself. However, Judah does get it. Judah does understand that principle. And so let's jump quite a number of chapters to Genesis chapter 42. And so just by way of reminder, so a lot has happened in these few chapters, right? The scripture focus is exclusively on Joseph and his experience. He comes to Potiphar's house. He becomes a servant. He becomes a slave because he is faithful. He rises through the ranks. And then one fateful day, Potiphar's wife throws in a big monkey wrench, and she accuses Joseph of wanting to commit adultery with him, which is of course not true. Potiphar is enraged. He throws him into prison. But Joseph is diligent and he is faithful in what he does. And so even in prison, the rulers of the prison, they see that he is a faithful and diligent young man, and they give him more and more responsibility, and he's trusted more and more. At some point, the two eunuchs of the Pharaoh show up with their dreams, and he interprets their dreams. And one day, one gets out, the other one is killed. They go back to Pharaoh. Pharaoh has two dreams, which is when that one eunuch remembers, oh, I was in prison. It was Joseph. Joseph interpreted my dream. Maybe he can also interpret Pharaoh's dream. Pharaoh calls Joseph. Joseph interprets the dream, and Joseph is given even more responsibility than any other man in Egypt, and he is given second in command. Right? Quite a miraculous story. There's lots of ups and downs, but just to refresh your memory. And so in chapter 42 is when we already have this whole 7 good years have come, and 7 good years have passed, and 7 bad years are now happening. And so Joseph is in Egypt, second on the throne, in command of all the stores and the resources of the Pharaoh, and he opens the grain reserves and sells to the people, which is what we find in chapter 40, in the last verse of chapter 41. So verse 57 of chapter 41. So all the country came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain because the famine was severe in all lands. So this is a situation that we find ourselves in. Chapter 42, when Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" Common phrase by fathers. And he said, "Indeed, I have heard that there's grain in Egypt. Go down to the place and buy for us there, that we may live and not die." So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. And the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was a governor over all the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brother came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. And we also find in later verses that he spoke through an interpreter. So they were speaking two different languages, and that's why the brothers never recognized Joseph. Then he said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them, and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land, or the exposed parts of the land." And they said to him, "No, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's son. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies." But he said to them, "No, but you have come to see the nakedness of the land." And they said, "Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more." But Joseph said to them, "It is as I spoke to you, saying, You are spies. In this manner you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you, or else, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." So he put them all together in prison 3 days. We're going to read further, but for the moment, let's stop there. A couple things to highlight here is famine is in the land. Jacob sees that there's grain in Egypt, and so the only logical thing is to send someone there and to buy food. However, Joseph recognizes his brothers, and the issue of his sons having sold him into slavery has not been dealt with. No justice has been done in this scenario, and Joseph also doesn't know what kind of men has become out of his brothers. Are they still the same brothers that they were back then, who, in hateful motion, looked at their brother and said, "You know what, we're ready to kill him," and just because one man said, "Let us not shed our brother's blood," they sold him? Or have they changed? And so he's harsh to them. He tests them. Joseph is not harsh to them for his own entertainment. Joseph is testing them here. And there's a number of tests that these individuals are being brought through. And Joseph, which is the offended party in this whole scenario, pinpoints and tests for their unity, really. He tests his brother whether they are still the men that they were when they sold him, or whether they have changed. And so in verse 9, Joseph accuses them of being spies. Now that makes sense. It is a logical accusation that you can see coming from a ruler of a whole land, the only land in the area that had food. There would have likely been people from all over the place, all different parts of the world, flocking to Egypt, because Egypt was the only nation in that land that had food. And so he accused them of spies and says, "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." The nakedness of the land really just means the exposed parts of the land. In other words, you are looking for a better place to live. Where you're coming from is probably devastated, and there's famine there, and you are now coming here to see what you can exploit from our land. And so that must have shocked the 10 brothers quite a bit. And they answer and say, "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. This is our sole motivation in being here. We're just here for the food." And in order to give more credit to their plea, they say, we're all one man's sons. We are honest men, right? We're a family. We're not military individuals or trained individuals, mighty men of some army somewhere from some distant place. No, we're a family. We're all brothers, and we need food, and that's why we're here. And they also use the phrase, "Your servants are not spies." But Joseph tests that. They said, "We are all one man's sons." Really? Are they really as unified as they make it sound? And so he says, no. You have come to see the nakedness of the land. No, in fact, you're spies. I believe you to be spies. And if you are spies, you will not live much longer. And so he says again to his brothers in verse 11, in verse 12, "No, but you've come to see the nakedness of the land." And this is when they do it this is when they say what they've upheld a second time. But this time they add something. They again say, no, your servants are 12 brothers. Here they name a number. The first time they just said, we're all one man's sons. And there would have been 10 individuals standing in front of Joseph. Because Benjamin was at home and Joseph was the 11th or the 12th brother. Here they say, no, your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, which is back home, and one is no more. Of course, they didn't know that Joseph had survived. And here, Joseph tests them again, especially on that fact of unity. They said, we're 12 brothers and we're sons of one man. And so he tests them, he maintains his accusation, and he says, no, it is as I spoke to you, saying, you are spies. And you know how we're going to test this? We're going to test it this way. All of you are going to stay here. And just like back a number of years ago, where all of you stayed there and one of you was sold, now we're going to turn the cards around. The tables have turned. Now all of you are going to stay here, and one of you is going to go and get your youngest brother. Ooh, that must have driven quite a spike into their conscience. Not only because they are now at the mercy of this ruler, but they now had to entrust their fortune, essentially, and their fate to one man. And who did he have to get? He had to get Benjamin, the other son of Rachel. The other son, their mother and their mother Leah, and 4 of the other ones had servants as mothers. They weren't loved. They weren't desired by Jacob, but Rachel was loved, and Joseph sends to bring exactly that brother, Benjamin, to them, the youngest one. And so Joseph is testing: is one man of these brothers going to take the responsibility, going to take the initiative? Is one man of these brothers looking around and looking at their situation, says, we are lost, there's no hope for us. One man has to go, one man has to sacrifice himself. If we need to save ourselves, if we ever want to live and get out of this place, one man has to take the hit. And so he throws him into prison 3 days. And after these 3 days, it seems like his brothers have come to no conclusion. There doesn't seem to be any plan to how they want to go about this. They do not come out and say, yes, you know what, we're going to send Reuben. He's the oldest, he's the most equipped, he has the most experience, he will go. We trust him, he is responsible. There's no one that they suggest. And so in verse 18, in verse 17 is when they are thrown into prison. They've spent their 3 days in prison. And in verse 18 is when Joseph comes to them after 3 days. And he says to them, do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house, but you go and carry grain for the famine of your houses. And bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die. Joseph now changes the situation up a little bit, and he gives them a bit of a hint. In the beginning, he said, all of you will stay, and one will go. And now he changes and says, no, all of you can go except one man. One man has to stay here. And I expect that Joseph was waiting. He was waiting for them to crowd together and to discuss, okay, which one of us is going to be? If one is going to stay, that means the rest of us brothers will have to come home. We will have to get Benjamin. We will have to make this trip back. Someone has to take the hit, right? One for the team. It's a common phrase, right? Someone has to stay. And that individual who stays, now the rest of us will have to take care of his wife and his children and his livestock and so on. We will now somehow have to work together. But it doesn't seem like they come up with any sort of idea. And so what Joseph does is he takes Simeon and he binds Simeon before their eyes. And this is peculiar because he doesn't take Reuben and he doesn't take Judah, who were both men who spoke and who were instrumental in him going down to Egypt and being a slave. He picks Simeon. Simeon is the second oldest. Reuben is the first, then Simeon, then Levi, and then Judah. And he picks Simeon. And I cannot help but wonder if he picks Simeon and if he watches Reuben and Judah and he sees, you guys were so quick to speak up when you sold me. Reuben, you wanted to bring me back to my father, but you didn't go all the way. You couldn't. You just didn't stand in the gap and say between me and between the brothers and said, no, no one is going to be sold. No one is going to be killed today. Reuben just didn't do it. And maybe he looks at Judah and sees, Judah, you were so quick to see your personal gain in my whole situation there when I was sold. Are you going to be this quick in seeing the situation that we are now in? Are you going to be that quick to volunteer yourself and see that everyone else will benefit if you stay here, if you remain here? I'm going to bind Simeon and find out what is in your heart, what you really think. How have you changed Reuben and Judah? And nothing happens. Well, not nothing happens. In verse 22, we find that they begin to remember the sin of the past. They do not repent yet, but they do remember. And Reuben says to his brother, right, or in verse 21, they said one to another, they're all recognizing, somehow this seems oddly familiar. We know this from our past, and they say we are truly guilty concerning our brother. For we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore, this distress has come upon us. This situation is oddly familiar. We saw, we know, we